So you know about the structure of DNA, but let's now see what it does. Every 3 bases, nucleotides, called a triplet, codes for an amino acid. The sequence of these triplets, or codons, gives the order amino acids should be joined together with peptide bonds to form a polypeptide chain, and ultimately a protein. Some bits of DNA don't code for amino acids. These are called introns. One use for these is separating codon regions, which are called exons. As there are 4 different bases, A, T, C, and G, there are 64 possible triplets. However, there are only 20 different amino acids. That means there's redundancy built into the system. In case mutations happen, there are backups. Humans have 46 chromosomes, 23 homologous pairs, which can carry different versions, alleles of the same gene. The 23rd chromosome determines a person's sex. Females have 2 X chromosomes, males have 1 X, 1 Y. mRNA, messenger RNA, is a one-stranded molecule of ribonucleic acid that creates a copy of the code in DNA. This is transcription, and the process goes as follows. DNA is uncoiled and unzipped by the enzyme DNA helicase by breaking the hydrogen bonds between the complementary bases. Free nucleotides then attach to the mRNA and pair up to one of the strands, A to T, C to G. The exception being that it's uracil that pairs up with A, adenine on the DNA. That means no mRNA copy of the code has a T, thymine. The bases are bound together by the enzyme RNA polymerase, which forms the phosphodiester bonds just like in DNA. What's amazing is that even though introns are copied to what we call pre-mRNA, it's then spliced, chopped up, and then reattached to remove these redundant regions, leaving just exons to make mature mRNA. This only happens in eukaryotic cells, though. The mRNA then moves to the ribosomes in the cytoplasm, out of the nuclear membrane pores if necessary, where translation occurs. This is the process of protein synthesis. First, mRNA binds to the ribosome. Then tRNA, transfer RNA, brings amino acids to the ribosome one at a time. It's also a single strand, but it only has a triplet of bases, and the associated amino acid is attached to the other end. tRNA then attaches to the mRNA, where all 3 complementary bases match. 2 of these are bound to the mRNA at any given time, allowing for the attached amino acids to be joined together one by peptide bonds, which then detach from the tRNA. The same strand of mRNA can pass through multiple ribosomes simultaneously, increasing its efficiency. Variation can be caused by genetic mutations. A nucleotide can be substituted for another, which can result in a different amino acid being coded for, therefore making a different protein ultimately. A nucleotide can also be deleted. This is much worse, as there's no redundancy for this. It always leads to the wrong amino acid being made, frame shift. Mutations can also occur at the chromosome level. For example, polyploidy is when more than a pair of a chromosome is made, and non-disjunction is when there's 1 extra or 1 missing chromosome due to them not separating properly during meiosis. Meiosis also gives rise to much-needed variation. Unlike mitosis, genetically different haploid cells, only 1 set of chromosomes are made to produce gametes, sex cells. The DNA is replicated, interphase, to make sister chromatids. These pair up, prophase, line up, metaphase, and genes swap or cross over at this point, and then it divides. This is meiosis 1. Then the sister chromatids separate, that's anaphase, and the cell divides again to form 4 genetically different haploid cells. That's meiosis 2. Mutations result in variation within a species, a population. If they share the same niche in an environment, they compete for the same resources. Those with beneficial characteristics are more likely to survive and reproduce. This is called natural selection. That means the frequency of different alleles varies over time. Directional selection is when an environmental change occurs and individuals with the phenotype, the set of expressed characteristics that's best suited to the change, are more likely to survive. Stabilizing selection is when the environment is stable, meaning that the species is already probably well adapted to it. Therefore, any variation will likely be detrimental, so they're not selected. An organism's phenotype, its physical characteristics, is determined by its genotype, the alleles, the variants of genes, it has in its DNA. This is inherited by offspring. Diploid cells carry 2 alleles for each gene found on both sets of chromosomes. If an allele is dominant, it will be expressed in the phenotype no matter what, even if the other one is recessive. These are only expressed if there is no dominant allele present. Some traits are controlled by 1 gene, monohybrid inheritance. This is what you likely learned about at GCSE, for example, with cystic fibrosis. The Punnett square shows us that if both parents carry the recessive allele, there's a 25% chance their child will have both recessive alleles, meaning it would be expressed. he or she will have the disease. It's not quite as simple as straight probability like this though, but it's fairly close. Dihybrid inheritance is when we consider two different characteristics inherited from two different genes. This gives a 9:3:1 ratio of phenotypes, as you can see from the Punnett square. Human blood group is an example of codominance. Here there are 3 alleles. A person has 2 of these. We say there are 2 loci. The A and B alleles are codominant. Both alleles are expressed, while O is recessive. Therefore, there are 4 different phenotypes. Some expression of alleles is linked to sex. The X and Y chromosomes determine sex. XX for female, XY for male. The other 22 pairs of chromosomes are therefore called autosomal. The loci, the locations of sex-linked genes, are found on the X chromosome. So that means females will carry 2 alleles of such a gene, whereas males only carry 1. A boy's X chromosome must come from his mum, as he must get his Y chromosome from his dad, meaning if the gene is to be expressed, the allele must come from his mum. An example is red-green color blindness. If the boy's mum carries the allele for the condition, there's a 50% chance it will be expressed. A girl gets an X chromosome from each of her parents, so there's a 50% chance she will carry the gene, but it will never be expressed. You also have autosomal linkage, the fact that some genes on the same chromosome are inherited together, resulting in only 2 possible combinations of alleles. Epistasis is the phenomenon whereby one gene locus masks or suppresses or changes the expression of another. The most common example is mouse fur color. Here's the result of the combinations of the 4 different gametes. In the case of recessive epistasis, like this, the ratio of phenotypes is 9:3:4. For dominant epistasis, it's 12:3:1. The ratios we have from different types of inheritance can tell us how many of each phenotype we should get in a population in theory, but sometimes there are other factors that will affect this. To determine whether or not the observed result is statistically different enough from the expected result so we can consider other factors, we use the chi-squared test. Naturally, when it comes to any statistics, we need a big sample size, at least 20. Chi-squared, which looks like an X but is technically the Greek letter chi, is equal to the sum of the difference between observed and expected count squared divided by expected count. So let's say a flower has 2 phenotypes, red and white. The ratio should be 3:1, as the allele for red is dominant. Let's say we have 200 of them, we would expect 50 of them to be white. But let's say we find that 48 of them are white and 152 are therefore red. So for white, the calculation is 152 take away 150 squared, divided by 150, that's 0.027. Doing the same for red gives us 0.08. Summing these gives us 0.11 rounded to 2 sig figs. As this is less than the critical value of 3.84 for a p-value of 0.05, it's deemed statistically insignificant. The p-value, by the way, is an arbitrary value that everybody just agrees on being the threshold for this. As there are 2 categories involved in this example, there's just 1 degree of freedom, n equals 1. If there were 3 categories, n would be 2, and the critical value would change. That's something you'd have to look up in a table. It's not something you can calculate. A population is a group of the same species of organism living in the same space, so they can breed. Gene pool is the term given to the total number of alleles present in a population. We use the Hardy-Weinberg equations, but it only works if we assume there are no mutations, no immigration or emigration that changes the allele frequency, that it's a large population, and there's also no selection going on. P and Q are the frequencies of the dominant and recessive alleles, respectively. P squared is the frequency of the homozygous dominant alleles. Q squared is the same but for the recessive alleles. And 2pq is the frequency of the heterozygous alleles. While variation in phenotypes within a population can vary due to random fertilization, meiosis, and mutations of alleles, environmental factors can also play a part. If the alleles change enough over generations such that they can no longer interbreed, speciation has occurred. You now have different species. Mutations can occur due to nucleotides being inserted, deleted, duplicated, inverted, or translocated. These often happen during DNA replication. These can happen spontaneously, but they're more likely to occur if the DNA is exposed to chemical mutagens or ionizing radiation. Often these won't have a detrimental effect due to it mutating non-coding DNA, or it doesn't affect something important. The body can choose what DNA is transcribed by transcription factor molecules. For example, estrogen diffuses into a cell as it's lipid soluble and it binds to a transcription factor, and then this changes the shape of the DNA binding site so it can bind to it, and this stimulates the transcription of the gene it's bound to. Small interfering RNA, or siRNA, can switch off genes so they're not expressed. That's why it's also called silencing RNA. It binds to the complementary sequence if found on mRNA, giving it a second strand. This is then detected as being not quite right, so it's broken down by enzymes so the sequence the mRNA carried isn't translated. The turning on and off of genes can be inherited even though the base code hasn't changed. This is the realm of epigenetics. Genes can be methylated. A methyl, CH3 group, is attached to cytosine, which suppresses transcription. This happens in stem cells in order for them to specialize. Another mechanism is histones, positively charged proteins binding to DNA more tightly when they're acetylated less as they become more positive. This results in transcription factors being less able to access the gene. If a mutation results in uncontrolled cell division, this forms a tumor. This is cancer. Benign tumors don't spread, while malignant tumors grow quickly and spread by metastasis, damaging multiple organs. Proto-oncogenes are cells that produce proteins that stimulate cell division. If they mutate, they turn into oncogenes, and they cause cells to divide uncontrollably. Tumor suppression genes are responsible for stopping the cell cycle when a mutation is detected. If these are switched off, that's also bad news for the same reason. If genes are methylated too much, this is hypermethylation. This can both be used to stop cancer forming, but it can also result in cancer developing if it happens to the wrong gene, like a tumor-suppressing gene. We said estrogen binds to transcription factors to increase transcription, but if this happens to genes responsible for cell division, that can also result in cancer developing. Determining what each gene is responsible for in an organism's genome is incredibly useful, say when it comes to making personalized medicine, combating viruses, identifying inherited disorders like Huntington's disease, and gene therapy. It also allows us to identify links between organisms to find out if they have a common ancestor, for example. An individual's genetic code is unique, so DNA profiling can be used to obtain this. First, we must make millions of copies of the DNA sample using polymerase chain reaction, PCR. The sample is mixed with primers, free nucleotides, and DNA polymerase. It's heated to 95 degrees C to break the hydrogen bonds between the strands, then cooled to around 60 degrees so the primers can bind to them. The temperature is then increased to the optimal temperature for DNA polymerase at around 70 degrees. It creates a copy of the sample by complementary base pairing using free nucleotides. This process is repeated to provide a big enough sample to work with. This is a form of cloning, to be precise, in vitro cloning. Recombinant DNA technology allows us to manipulate DNA. We use the enzyme reverse transcriptase found in bacteria to produce DNA from RNA, then use restriction enzymes, endonucleases, to cut up DNA into fragments. We insert a desirable gene into a recombinant bacterial plasmid. Both are cut with the same restriction enzyme, so the sticky ends, which are complementary, create strong bonds when they come together. If they do join together during incubation, DNA ligase seals the deal by forming the phosphodiester bonds between the nucleotides. The bacteria is then used as the vector by which the DNA is inserted into the cells of another organism by electroporation early in its development, so the gene is expressed. Such bacteria can also just be used to make substances needed for medical purposes by inserting the gene required, for example, insulin-secreting bacteria. This insulin is then injected into diabetics. A DNA probe is a short single strand of DNA that's used to identify a sequence in DNA when it bonds to complementary pairs. These are amplified, copied using PCR. A radioactive or fluorescent dye is bound to the probe so it can be detected. So for example, if you make a DNA probe with the sequence responsible for Huntington's, it will bind to the DNA in cells taken from a person and can be detected. DNA probes are also used in genetic fingerprinting, used in forensics for example. If a crime is committed, cells left behind by the perp are taken and DNA is extracted and cut into fragments using restriction enzymes. They're then separated by electrophoresis, a type of chromatography that uses electricity to draw smaller fragments further along a gel plate. Radioactive DNA probes are then added to specific fragments, which show up on X-ray film that's placed on top of the nylon sheet they're on. This can then be compared with that from a suspect. So I hope you found that helpful. Leave a like and a comment if you did, and don't forget to check out our revision app to help you test your knowledge. Links in description.